Hello and welcome to Esri's Fire and Emergency Services webinar series, and today we'll be discussing Who Do You Serve? Informational session about demographic data and local data that you have access to that can improve your operations, planning, and recovery. We perform these webinars to promote the use of GIS in public safety agencies, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of it, and feel free to reach out to us afterwards if you need some assistance or information or any support related to GIS for fire and EMS. So some housekeeping issues. Please use the chat window to ask any questions. There'll be 3 interactive poll questions that we ask you to respond to, so please provide us that data because it helps us serve you. A video recording of this webinar will be posted online after, and also an email to all attendees with links that are pertinent to the information. So today we're joined by John Petter, one of our disaster response program solution engineers, and I'll turn it over to John for an introduction. John.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So I'm John Petter, and I'm a solutions engineer on Esri's public safety team, also tech lead for our disaster response program. So when those requests come in during times of disaster, they come into our program and we get them assigned out to the various techs to help support those. And one of those is me. I also support a lot of Esri's work within special events. And search and rescue as well. I've been a search and rescue volunteer for over 12 years. So I'm also out in the field actively doing search and rescue. And MapSAR was one of the products that I originally developed, getting me involved in GIS. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks, John. And I will say John has responded to multiple Type 1 events using GIS to support major responses to disasters worldwide. And I am from Henrico County, Virginia, and John supported us on a number of disaster and special event incidents. So John, glad to have you today, and thanks for participating. I am Mike Cox. I'm the Director of Fire and EMS Solutions for Esri. I'm essentially your fire GIS liaison officer. So any of your GIS needs related to fire and EMS, please reach out and ask any questions or contact me at any point if you need assistance. I'm from Henrico County, Virginia, which is the central part of the state of Virginia, and I retired there a little over a year ago. Retired as the Deputy Chief of Community Risk Reduction. Throughout my career, it was primarily in operations for about 23 of the 27 years there, so was never really the GIS or IT guy, but was exposed to it as through an assignment in emergency management and then through community risk reduction especially, but used a lot of GIS during special events. And what the power demonstrated to me by that was the ability to get data that's already existing, that you already have access to, and use it both for response and planning. And that one aspect of that is what we're going to discuss today, and that is demographic data. There's a great deal of demographic data available through Esri, through federal agencies, state agencies, and at the local level, and not just about population, which we're going to talk about today, at-risk populations and things of that nature, but also what is your housing stock, what is your occupancy type, what things that impact your decision making, both in planning and response. So we talk about how do we use GIS to improve our operations or build efficiencies, and what is GIS? It's not simply a map. It's a way to gather information, measure, analyze, and understand. And we have to be able to understand to make good decisions. We have to be able to analyze to make improvements. You can't improve if you can't measure. So the ability to take GIS through multiple applications and apply it throughout the operational world, in the field, and administrative functions and recovery functions. And we do that through a number of applications, and that includes desktop applications and web apps, AGOL, the cloud-based environment. Certainly field apps or you're seeing more and more use of mobile apps to collect data and also to communicate to responders in the field. Dashboards for our decision makers, for the incident commander, or day-to-day issues, even administrative functions where you can see the measures come forward so you can make good decisions. And story maps, which John will demonstrate 1 or 2 of those as well, as an excellent method to communicate with the public or brief officials about what the issues are and what data we're collecting. And we can interweave any kind of data into these products. So it's not simply a map, but we can absorb things like imagery and databases, spreadsheets, certainly LiDAR, 3D data. And you're seeing a lot of that being used now to help both with incident response and for planning. And what's really becoming evident is it's a geospatial cloud for the whole public safety community. So you think about an agency that's dealing with an event or planning for an event, and they're collecting data, or they have their local data, but they can share it seamlessly with other agencies that are coming to assist. So whether it's other police and fire agencies, emergency management, and beyond that to non-traditional agencies, like NGOs, and Red Cross is an excellent example. They're a huge user of GIS and the Esri platform. And to be able to exchange data with those national agencies, federal agencies, seamlessly helps you make decisions, helps you understand what's going on in your community, and helps you understand what the impact is. In addition, non-traditional agencies like associations or private industry to understand, your logistical supply needs through maybe private vendors, or understand, the broadband network, things that we don't typically do day to day. But again, we can share that kind of impactful data seamlessly. And also being able to analyze data, both what we generate locally and what's generated by other agencies at, say, a state or federal level. And the fire service has a history of not using data appropriately. And it's an excellent way to deal with emerging threats, because we look at things like the opioid crisis or the homeless issues. You can't simply hire firefighters and build fire stations and then throw at the problem. We can't absorb that funding. We can't understand or take the impact in our budget, and it just takes too long to respond that way. So an efficient way to do that is to use GIS to understand fully what the problem is and build efficiencies into our response. And it's really about getting the right data to the right person at the right time. And some of that data includes, census data and understanding what our community is, understanding at the neighborhood level who's being impacted by these disasters, or what we need to do to have an appropriate response for our communities locally. And so now we have the first poll question, and I'll turn it over to John to read the poll question and elicit your responses.
Okay, everyone. Is your agency sharing a GIS-based common operating picture to outside agencies? Is the question. And select one of these if you would. We are not using GIS-based mapping at our agency. We use on-prem GIS map products for our agency only. My agency provides paper map products to other agencies. My agency provides cloud-based GIS maps to outside agencies. So take a second if you would, and pick one and give us a vote.
And John, to provide this some context for what we're discussing today, as far as who do you serve, we see a lot of struggles with agencies when they're trying to, measure or understand what their homeless problem is, or measure and understand, how the opioid crisis is impacting their community, because you have multiple agencies that are attempting to collect and analyze that data. There might be, social services or a local or state health department, certainly a local fire and EMS agency, and local law enforcement. And again, GIS is a great way to interact with those other agencies or outside, your normal lines of communication, and share that data. Okay. And we'll wait just a second for the responses there. Okay, excellent response. We use on-prem GIS products, and then also my agency provides cloud-based GIS maps, the two largest responses. So excellent. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we collect data, and we'll have some sharing options, or sharing methodology that we can actually improve your communications through the use of GIS. And so we often talk about, all response starts with a risk assessment, and this risk assessment model here is the one provided by Vision 2020. But are we using our local community data and our demographic data to perform this risk assessment model? Are we understanding that our community makeup could affect how we prioritize those risks? If we consider evacuation zones around major industrial sites, or flood inundation zones, to understand what areas in those zones might have at-risk populations, or what populations in those zones may not have transportation capability. So, it provides a process to identify various risks and how that risk will impact us. So we can use data to develop a community profile and understand what the risk is, and identify target hazards, including, those structures that create a threat to both the occupants and to the responders trying to assist. Part of that community profile is going to include things like age, gender, social and cultural information, education, and then of course that parcel layer data that you have access to at a local level is incredibly powerful. I mean, it allows you to understand how, how the structures and the occupancies are going to be impacted during either a disaster like a flood or hurricane or tornado, or how they're impacted individually by things like a fire. And then understanding what the populations at greatest risk. So you have access to data, which we're going to show you today, that will give information on economic factors, at risk, the very old, the very young, people with disabilities, poverty level, things that increase the risk of our population. And again, the target hazard, where we can provide risk levels at individual address points. So we'll talk about risk assessments at individual parcel layers. So you can look at each individual structure and understand what that risk is. And overlaying that demographic profile. So what you see here is part of our tapestry segmentation. It's just one tool to understand what our community is, the community we serve. This is a map of first due areas, fire station first due areas that's overlaid over our tapestry segmentation. So if you think about, a station captain or battalion chief in the field, being able to look at a first due area and understand what is that community, what are their behaviors, what are their needs, and what is the at-risk population may be dealing with. So again, we'll give you specific demonstrations about where this information is and how to access it and use it as part of your size up and risk assessment. So our next poll question, John, is coming up now.
Okay, poll question 2. Does your agency leverage demographic data for risk assessment or disaster planning? And select one of the following. My agency does not use demographic data. My agency uses primarily federal or national level data, so that's probably sort of census level data. And we use GIS map products with community level demographic data. So if you could just take a minute and choose one of those, that'd be great. Thank you.
John, a lot of localities leverage the census data, and typically that could have some age to it, and also it's pretty broad scope. Can you discuss quickly what in addition to typical federal census data we have available to them?
Yeah, I think you already hit on one of those, Mike, which was sort of the tapestry segmentation. The version that you had shown right there was the 2015 screenshot, but we have a newer version of that at 2018. And there's also a great deal of data that Esri purchases from commercial sources, and then we can turn around and make that available throughout the platform. And I'll be giving some specific demonstrations of that as we go forward. But the thing with the census data is it's only every 10 years, so it can, unless it's after a recent census, it can be sort of rather stale to some of the areas.
Excellent, thanks, John. And our responses to our poll question. Does your agency leverage demographic data for risk assessment or disaster planning? And the best or the largest response there, 46%, is we use GIS map products with community level demographic data. That's excellent. And that's what we're trying to point to today is there's so much more than just say a federal census or that census block level data that you can access through your Esri products. So again, we'll show some more of that as John spoke to soon. So I talked about understanding what our occupancy types are and doing a risk assessment by address point. And when we think about our community-wide risk assessment, or maybe the risk assessment required through the accreditation process, localities and agencies typically or often do an area, such as a first due area, or maybe we do a risk assessment by square mile, some kind of gridded map. But you have the data locally to do a risk assessment for every address point in your city or county. And it's relatively simple to do. It's a simple workflow. You can actually look at our target hazard solution that's on our solutions page. We'll provide that workflow, and you can apply it to every parcel, not just commercial. And the ability to understand what each individual structure, what the risk is to the occupants and to firefighters, is vital. And it changed the way we did business back in Henrico County as far as how we dispatch resources. But to be able to look at specific characteristics that may raise the risk level or threat level, and it's flexible. It's up to you. You can add or remove the risk characteristics as you deem fit. But we looked at things like, how far was it from a water supply? How far was it from the closest hydrant? What was the square footage? How many stories? But you can add things like, does an occupancy have a basement, which may elevate risk? Is it sprinklered? Obviously, which would reduce the risk some. But prior to doing this individual address-based risk assessment, we were sending the same number of resources to an 800 square foot bungalow house that we were sending to a 6,000 square foot McMansion, right? We were sending the same number of resources to a convenience store that we were sending to a big box store or a mid-rise. And if you think about that, that's ridiculous. That's almost irresponsible. If you look at a job task analysis, you're going to need additional resources based on the risk of that individual occupancy. So by doing that individual risk assessment for every address point, we changed the way we dispatch resources. And our planning section, our GS professionals, they did an excellent job in integrating this individual risk assessment into our CAD system. So that it's run every 2 weeks, roughly twice a month, to catch new addresses and new occupancy types. But essentially, once the 911 officer, once that communication officer identifies the address and verifies the address, there's no decision making on, you know, whether it's an apartment complex or single family dwelling or you know, a commercial or a high rise or whatever. Just based on that risk assessment, we know the exact level of risk involved in that address. So what we used to send to every commercial, you know, 4 engines and 2 ladder trucks, we now have varying levels of risk, where with our highest level of risk, we may send 5 engines, 3 special services or 3 ladder trucks, and 2 ambulances and several command officers. But it's based on that individual address's risk, which is very powerful in that, you know, we're sending the right number of people to the right place at the right time to get the job done. Another example of leveraging GIS to do a risk analysis or risk assessment resulted out of a significant issue we had with residential fire deaths. We had 6 fire deaths in a short amount of time in a mid-sized county, which, you know, impacted our community significantly. So the fire chief at the time said that we want a 10-year tamper-proof smoke alarm on every level of every single family dwelling in our county. And so that was like, how do we accomplish that? That's a significant initiative. So what we wanted to do in our GIS, again, our GIS and planning office did an excellent job. We want to prioritize all the single family dwellings in our community and be able to start with the highest risk addresses. So again, a very similar workflow that we did with, you know, with our risk assessment for the dispatch and the overall risk assessment for every address. We looked at just single family dwellings, and we determined what characteristics elevate the risk for a death in a single family dwelling in our community. So we looked at things like household income. We looked at, you know, when the home was constructed. We looked at things like when it was sold, the previous sale date, because we figured if it was sold recently, it probably had updated smoke alarms installed. We also looked at things like, was it a rental? And one of the ways to figure that out is we have our own water utility at the time, and we looked at the parcel layer and the name that was on the deed. So you looked at the water bill and you looked at who owned the home. And if the names on the water bill didn't match the name that owned the home, we assumed that was a rental. And I thought that was pretty amazing. Obviously, it's not 100%, but to be able to understand where is that transient population that may not be taking care of that structure as much as a resident owner may take care of it. You can also do things like add CAD data to your analysis. So say you run an address 3 falls within 12 months. That might elevate the risk for you that somebody may not be ambulatory or be able to get out of a home or evacuate themselves during a structure fire. So what we did was we did that risk assessment on all single family dwellings, and we put it on a map. And the companies in the district could then pull that map up when they were, say, you know, returning from an EMS call or on the way to the store or whatever the case may be, and they could understand where those at-risk addresses were. So we weren't going into a community and just doing every house on a street. We knew where the at-risk homes were, and we're going to those individual addresses and try to alleviate the risk by, you know, home safety survey, public education, and installing those tamper-proof 10-year smoke alarms in the residence. And through performance measures and doing a weekly report on the impact of these of this program, and it may be difficult to see there, but if you look at the bottom of this report, 86% of the time somebody answered the door at one of these at-risk dwellings, or what we assess as at-risk dwellings, they needed assistance, they needed that service, they needed that smoke alarm. And to me, that's incredible, because that means we weren't wasting time, right? We were focusing resources on where they needed to go to improve the survivability of the folks in our community. So again, highly successful, and I commend our planning section and GIS personnel back in Henrico County, because it was a very impactful program for us. And so how else do we understand what demographics, or use demographics to tell our story as well? So we do things like drive time analysis, right? We do things like identifying gaps in our response zones and our first due areas. But to be able to take this kind of data and integrate demographic data into it, understand that, you know, hey, these are the folks that are living in these areas. These are the folks that need the most service. These are the at-risk populations that we're either serving well, or maybe we're not serving as well as we should. So we may need to add more resources. We may need to build that fire station. We may need to add that ambulance or transport unit. And you'll see one demonstration in a few minutes where you can look at specific areas in your locality and understand, you know, what is the total population in a first due area? How many seniors over the age of 65? You know, how many folks do we have maybe without vehicles, without the ability to evacuate themselves, or have ambulatory issues within that first due area? And that's all available to you right now, both at the federal level, the local level, and through obviously Esri. We provide a great deal of that data, as John was speaking to earlier. And the ability to understand how our operations impact those communities. So you see here, this is an evacuation map during one of the hurricanes in 2017, actually. But 40 million people went to this map in Florida to understand if they were in an evacuation zone or not. And to be able to do this kind of response or do this kind of visual product in a scalable manner, it takes that cloud-based service, that geospatial cloud, to deliver this kind of product. As you can see, 40 million hits on this map in 2 days. A lot of local architecture may not be able to handle that kind of traffic. But in addition, just understand the public understanding, where they're being impacted by whether it's the hurricane or whatever natural disaster you may be dealing with, for the decision makers to understand how our evacuation may impact that locality. This is an evacuation map that actually John worked on for the Commonwealth of Virginia. This was during Hurricane Florence, and they actually performed some evacuations. But you can see by zone, as you evacuate each zone, who are we impacting? So it's easy to identify number of businesses that might be closed by this evacuation, and the number of employees that are impacted within those businesses, total population. The one that really hit me by this was, in this evacuation zone that we've identified here, which was the first one, there were 23,000 households without a vehicle. So if you're going to evacuate a couple 100,000 people, it's probably important to know how many don't have the ability to transport themselves out of the evacuation zone. So you understand what your logistical need is for public transportation to move those folks out of that zone. And the ability to communicate with the public and public information programs, but two-way communication. And the crowdsource, the story map, that helps you, and we'll talk about field data collection of demographic data, but this helps you understand who's being impacted the most, and you can look at what communities, what neighborhoods, and understand how they're, whether it's say a mobile home park versus kind of a hardened structure and in certain types of communities. But these two-way crowdsource map provides essential information during a disaster. What occurs here, the workflow here is, the public submits the picture, you verify the location, and then if you drill down on this map here, you could actually go to the address point where they submitted the picture and understand exactly how that address is being impacted. So again, powerful way to understand what's happening in your community. And then the field applications that collect data are vital. You can see here during Hurricane Michael, this is Mexico Beach, Bay County, Panama City area. There was almost 100,000 data points collected, but a lot of those data points were specific to individuals, victim contacts, and how they were impacted, understanding what neighborhoods are being impacted the most. So you can see patterns develop on where we need to focus resources. And a lot of this data is collected in real time with our field mobile applications. So you'll see things like Survey 123 or our collector application, that you get this data back to a command post or back to an emergency operations center in real time and understand how our communities are being impacted and where do we focus resources. Another excellent method of using our mobile applications that helps you collect demographic data specific to an incident or issue that's impacting your community. If we look at things like our off-the-shelf solutions for homelessness, so our homeless count dashboard there you see at the top right, there are personnel in the field that are actually collecting that demographic data, so you understand how many adults are being impacted by the homeless issue, how many children, and this one in particular was veterans that are impacted, how long have they been homeless. Those kind of issues can be collected by personnel in the field, so you can start assessing how the local community is being impacted by that issue. And the same with the opioid abuse. We see a lot of good examples of field personnel using mobile data applications, on a phone, on a tablet, or an MDC, to collect specific demographic data to understand what community and what people are being impacted by things like heroin overdoses and the opioid abuse issue. So we'll have our final poll question. John, if you could jump in there and give us that poll question.
Absolutely. Is your agency deploying mobile applications in the field to collect demographic data? So select one of the following. We are not currently performing any data collection. We receive data from outside agency and manual updated maps, or we use mobile applications to collect real-time demographics. So take a moment, if you would, and vote on one of those.
And John, have you seen a lot of localities using that field or our mobile apps to collect that kind of demographic data? I mean, do we see a lot of surveys that collect specific information about the people we serve?
I would say that as our technology has become sort of easier to use and more accepted by field personnel and easily understood, so exactly as you said, things like Survey 123, I think we've seen a large growth in people using mobile field collection workflows to collect things like that exactly for homeless counts, say drug and activity or overdoses, exactly as you mentioned, in addition to other things like damage assessments, et cetera, but also for search and rescue, which also has relocation, so people relocations. I needed to relocate someone from this location to somewhere else, and now you've got actually a record of doing that. So yes, I'm seeing a much larger adoption.
Yeah, excellent. And I can tell you the ability to collect data in the field like that often overcomes obstacles we see in data sharing between agencies. If you have, HIPAA issues, it's often difficult to pull specific data out of a EMS report or patient care report. And same thing with social services and often law enforcement. They do not want to share data with fear of releasing some kind of personal data that they shouldn't share, right? But the ability for individuals to go out and collect anonymized data in a mobile application allows you to see that data regardless of agency, and it really can overcome some of those obstacles. So we have the response to our poll question here: is your agency deploying mobile applications in the field to collect demographic data? And we are not performing any data collection at 52%. We receive data from outside agency and manually update maps at 16%, and we use mobile applications to collect real-time demographics at 32%. So certainly some room there to increase the use of these mobile applications, and we're going to show you a couple of methods to do that. So another additional source for some of this data we're discussing is our Living Atlas, and Esri's Living Atlas has thousands of data sets available to you, and it's everything from real-time weather to real-time traffic to flood and stream gauges. I mean, nearly anything you can consider. But there is also a lot of that demographic data available to you, and down to the local level, it could get pretty granular actually. So again, that's something that if you have an account with Esri, you have access to our Living Atlas, and I encourage you to go. There's a website where you can explore it, whether you have an account or not. And so I'll send that link out after the webinar today. But if you just search for Esri Living Atlas, you can start looking at the amazing data sets that are available there. And John will show you how to enrich a map with some of the data that's available from our Living Atlas. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to John and allow him to do some demonstrations of some of the live maps that we can use to evaluate our demographic data. John?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much, Mike. So I'm going to go through and show you a lot of demographic tools and ways of pulling that into your maps and apps. But just to start out, I just wanted to point everybody to the solutions page, ArcGIS Solutions. These are solutions that Esri builds to get everybody a starting place, a good starting point when they're working on a problem. So if you think about some of the issues that Mike had talked about today in, say, local government, I can take a look in local government, and I've got a lot of the different local government agencies there, including fire service. So I can click on the fire service and I can come down and sort of take a look at some of the products which are available to me. As Mike mentioned, tackle the opioid epidemic. So we've got a complete set of solutions around this. We've got the fire flows, and we've got that target hazard analysis that Mike showed earlier and how they did that amazing work in Henrico. So just know that this is a great resource to go to get started and to actually develop your own products from. I just wanted to take a moment just to point this out before we got going. A couple of other things. Mike had also mentioned the Living Atlas of the world, and this is a tremendous resource of information available to you. This is the landing site, the website where you can go and explore, and you can come in here and browse and take a look at all the different information that's available, data sets, etc. And they give you good examples in here. So here's your world demographics, and we can just view that just by clicking on it, and it takes you to all sorts of map information. I'm also going to just go into a web map and show you how to pull it directly without having to go to the website. But it's just there's a tremendous amount of data, as you can see right here. This is worldwide, available to us at a click of a button. So here we go. It's close to my home right there. So let's just jump in and take a look at how we might leverage some of these things. So I'm in a ArcGIS Online organization here, and this one's set up for fire and emergency services, and it's just sort of branded on the front there. Obviously, your org will have your own brand on it, and look and be branded as yours. So what I've done, I've just opened a web map. So this is just a standard web map, nothing in it right now. So let's take a look and see what we can do and find some information out here, and then browse the Living Atlas and bring some other data in. So I'll do a search for layers. You can see I did a search earlier. And I'm going to actually search all of ArcGIS Online, not just in my organization. And let's just take a look for fire stations and see what we come up with. So there's a lot of different folks put out fire stations right here. I will literally randomly choose one. So let's just choose Pueblo fire stations, and we'll click on that. And there we go. We've just added those to a web map. It zoomed into the area, and we've got a couple of stations here on our map. So I've now got that layer available to me. I've got a lot of different options. I've got some symbols I can change. I can look at the data. But what we're more interested in today would be something like maybe first do. So this is an analyze button where we can perform an analysis. Lots of different analysis tools in here, from analyzing different patterns, enrichment, which we'll use in a moment, and proximity. So under proximity, I can create simple buffers, or I can also create a drive time analysis. So I could do a 4-minute drive time analysis around each of these stations that we've just pulled in. One of the really neat things in here is I can use traffic. But not just traffic right now. I can use live traffic, or I can use traffic based upon a typical time of day. So you might want to run multiple drive time analysis for rush hour and noon and evening and see what the different responses look like. I think that's a very powerful tool for doing that. For right now, we're just going to turn off traffic and just do the drive time just based upon the roads. So I've got 4 minutes. And I'm just going to click where I'm going to save it here. I'll save it in the root of my organization and run analysis. So we're actually using all the road networks here around each of these stations to produce a 4-minute drive time. So as you might suspect, you'll see some of these larger corridors here. Looks like Highway 50 and 85. And we'll probably see some arms going down those within 4 minutes. Whereas some of these tighter neighborhoods, it's going to be much smaller. So once this analysis comes back, the next step we're going to do is understand, okay, how many homes and how many people are in there? And that's when I'll start to show you some of the information that's very, very easily available and pulled in through Esri's Living Atlas products.
And John, if I can make a quick point, you're doing this in a web browser, right? This is not desktop software. This is not pro. So it's literally 4 or 5 steps in a web browser and you're done.
It is, and it's actually taking a little longer than I had expected this morning. So while that one's going, I'm just going to show you a couple other products, and we'll step back onto this map in a second. So Mike also mentioned earlier that I'm part of Esri's disaster response team, and this is the another ArcGIS Online organization, which is branded around our disaster response program. But one of the most common products which we put out, we call an impact summary map. And we found these to be quick and easy to put out, but very, very easy for people to understand. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples for that. So this was one that I did quite a while ago, actually, for the Napa earthquake. This is back in 14. But what this immediately gave to people viewing it was, we've got the shake map right here, which comes in from USGS, which is also available in the Living Atlas. But note, as I click each of these, my numbers, my demographic numbers are changing at the bottom. So I can see in the most affected how many people, but now I can see my vulnerable under 14 and my seniors 65 and older. If I look at businesses, I can look at healthcare facilities, et cetera, within here. You can also just drive this from the legend on the left-hand side, and I can click that and it'll zoom in and highlight the area of impact. And again, I can understand this very quickly. If you look at something like Irma, the impact map. So we had the cone of uncertainty, again from the Living Atlas coming in, but I could easily now see what's the population under there, and I'm using the same sort of demographic units to understand what is the potential impact within the cone of uncertainty of this particular storm. And lastly, we had a lot of tornado touchdowns right here, and this was a preliminary impact map, but this is all sort of the different areas. We can click on each of those, and again, we're zooming in and we're looking at total populations. We're using the similar metrics here of the elderly and the young and the households. So once you've even got any kind of a polygon on your map, it's easy to drive these enrichment tools from that. And talking about drive, let's see how our drive time analysis came back. There we go. So it did come back for me. And we've got our drive time analysis completed here for those stations which I had centered in the map. So this is each of the stations. And what I can do is just change them by station ID for different colors to make it just a little easier for us to see. So we can just do unique. Oh, that was the wrong layer. Let me grab the correct layer. Here we go. What I want here is the facility ID will be fine. And then we'll just symbolize this here by different colors so we can see each of them. So you can see how the network analysis ran out on the highways as we expected. So now let's see and understand who's in this area. So again, I can run the analysis tool, and I'm going to use the data enrichment. So data enrichment actually allows me to select variables, and this is now drilling into data that's available to you. So I've got some pretty easy ones in here, population, so I can choose the total population and see how it added that variable to my selection. We've got some poverty, so I could look at poverty below poverty level for households if that's something that was interested. I can take a look at the households. We'll just do total households, but I've got disabilities, I've got all these different sets of variables. So it really does behoove you to spend some time and go in here and understand if something happens. I'll choose the at-risk and the over 65. If something is going to happen in your district or in the area which you serve, what are the 5 or 10 standard variables that command staff are going to want to know? Identify those up front now and have those in your SOP. So when that boundary comes in, whether it's a flood, a hurricane, a tornado, a wildfire, or if you're just doing some community analysis, when that comes in, you know immediately, okay, command staff wants these 5 or 10 or 20 variables for each of these to understand that and make decisions from. So this has now come back. And if I look in these drive times, you'll see now that I've got below poverty for that particular area. I've got 942. I've got a total population of just over 11,000, 4,500 households, and quite a few seniors, almost 2,000 seniors living in that particular area.
That's amazing, John.
Yeah,
amazing. We can. And important to consider, I know you mentioned it, but understand that any polygon that's developed in any of your workflows, you can do this kind of analysis. So if you have that ERG widget in the situational awareness tool, that you've got a plume model, let's say, for a chemical release, you can identify who's in that plume model simply by enriching that layer. You can understand with a zone or flood inundation or storm surge area, you can understand exactly who's being impacted by these events.
Right. So thank you. I'm just making a couple of adjustments to this so we can see a little bit better. We got the fire stations on top and the drive times underneath. So now let's take a look at Living Atlas. So if we go into Living Atlas, rather than fire stations, we can look for tapestry. And on Mike's screenshot earlier, he had the 2015 tapestry that has now been updated to 2018. With a simple click of a button, I can add that to the map, and I can start understanding now a little bit more about this area that we have. So I've got my tapestry segments. Again, I can adjust the transparency so it doesn't blow out my map. But now if I'm looking around those drive times, I can actually click in and look at some of these and understand the tapestry segmentation within there, the dominant tapestry segmentation is written right here. It's called Hand Scrabble Road. Never heard of that one, but we'll click on it and we'll actually get a complete report here of socioeconomic traits, the neighborhood, race and ethnicity, income, net worth. And this was from, I think, 3 clicks of a mouse, or 4 clicks I did from the time I asked Living Atlas to find the tapestry for me, to being able to have all this rich information about that area that we just selected. Also in here, I'll just turn off the tapestry. We'll go back into the Living Atlas, and you can type and do a search if you know what you're looking for. But if you're just exploring, you can use the little filter right here. One of the things I always like to do first is only show content within my map area. That takes out a lot of the world content that might not be useful to me. But now I've got all these buckets here which I can look into. So environment is one we use a lot in the disaster response, emergency management, and what those workflows. Earth observations is probably one of the biggest one for weather. And that brings a lot of different feeds in from NOAA and sort of other areas. But we're actually looking for people today. So let's just zoom out a little bit on my map. So on people, I've now got world population, the national shelter system. I've got open shelters that I can add. The poverty ratio, I can bring that in. So just take some time and explore what's actually in Living Atlas, because there's so much information in here which you can really quickly and easily add to any web map. So we've added some more data to this. And again, I think I will change the transparency on this one because it's blowing our map out a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is just save this. So this would be a web map is generally where a GIS person would be. That can also create sometimes a bit of a bottleneck. Even though you've got great GIS staff, great GIS people, there's only so much time and resources. How if we can take this, turn it into an app, and allow someone else to actually run those enrichments for themselves? So I can click the share button, and sharing enables me not only to share it with groups inside my organization, but I can create a web app. I've got some of these templates in here, and this is where you would find that impact summary map that I just showed you a couple of examples on. But also in here, I could build an operations dashboard, and we'll be showing you some of those in a minute. And I could build a web app builder. So if I just build myself an app very quickly right now, this is taking the web map, the content, everything that's in there, and turning it into a web app. And this is the authoring environment. So what I can do here is I can choose a theme and what it's going to look like. One of my favorites is the Launchpad theme. And now I can add capabilities to this in the way of widgets. So I've got some placeholders top right to put widgets, and I can put them down the bottom. So very simply, if I was to add something simple like a base map widget, if I just click add, you'll see now that I've now got the ability to change base maps in my app. One of the ones that people have not discovered fully because they're a little buried is under the analysis. And if you click under analysis, you'll find that there is dozens and dozens of really good tools in here, which you can present to people inside the context of an app. And notice that you actually have the enrich layer tool right here. So if I click OK, I've actually now added an analysis layer and a enrich layer to my web app. So now I can share this out. So we could choose any of these in here. If I was to choose those travel times, I've now got the same interface to go through and select the variables. But now, because this is in an app, once I save this and I launch it, so we're just saving this right now and I can launch it. This is now a fully blown web app that we could send this link out to. If it's inside your organization, now we can run the analysis and we can do it right from within the app, so you don't have to have the GIS person always do that. So this is something that I think is very powerful, and just taking a look again through our tools and seeing what you can apply, there's a lot of use cases in there. Something else for demographics, and another tool that I find incredibly powerful is what we call Community Analyst. So Community Analyst is one of our premium apps, and I'll just open up a project here. You make projects in Community Analyst, and it provides even more data. There was several dozen variables available to you in those pop-ups, but in here, you end up with a tremendous amount of information. So let's just, I'm gonna pick an area kind of at random and just sort of zoom in. And what we'll do is we'll create maps from data, and I will use the Smart Map search feature, and I find this quite empowering. So when I get started here, I'm also presented again with a lot of different variables that I can bring in. So we'll do something in here. Let's look for flood insurance. So I can bring in people that have flood or earthquake insurance. Now let's look for vacant property. So I can take a look and see if I've got, oh, no, not property. Let's just say, look at vacant in here. There we go. So I've got vacant housing, not vacant property. So under my vacant housing, I can take a look at housing units that are vacant. You can go through this data set and again find tremendous amounts of information available to you. Again, here's poverty. Let's look at the poverty and I'll apply these. So this is different than the other enrichment, whereas it just took it and applied it to an area. This is almost doing it backwards. So I'm being presented a set of sliders right now. So on the sliders, I could look for homes that have insurance. So this is 0, and here's the 400 mark. And I can actually bring the slider in. And as I'm pulling the slider, you'll see the map will actually self-adjust and start to give me areas that do or don't have insurance. I can match that up now with areas with vacant housing. So you can pull that slider up a little bit, and I can start to look at that. And then I can also look at poverty levels. So if we bring the poverty level up a little, you'll see that we're actually identifying, based upon these sliders and these sliding variables, targets. So think about the problems that you have in your community and who you need to target. Some of these variables here you can change to, do they have internet access? Do they have social media access? So now if I'm talking to or targeting a community with community risk reduction programs, I need to make sure I'm presenting in the right language. We'll take it one step further. Now I can actually look at some of these particular neighborhoods right in here as well, and I can run an infographic report. So I think these are incredibly powerful. It's going to pull all known information from that area into these different infographic reports and give me a summary. And I've got multitudes of different reports in here. I can look at the at-risk population report. The beauty on these reports is once you've got this, I can now download it and I can now share it, and I can send it to command staff, and they're interactive. So I can send out that this is an area that we're having problems with. We've had a lot of fires, we've had a lot of EMS calls, issues in the area, and now they can understand who is in there. And here's all the population by spoken language within this map area right here. And again, these are interactive. I can click right here and export this, not as a PDF, but as a dynamic HTML, and I can now email that and share that to everybody. So that's quite a lot about the demographics from inside Community Analyst. I've got a few minutes here to wrap up, and I just want to show you a couple of dashboards. I will try and get to this story map in a moment and give you a glimpse of the wonderful work that they're doing in Arizona. But for field collections, this is something we had mentioned earlier. So this is the end count of a dashboard for a homeless count. But how do you get the information in there? We had a poll earlier on field data collections. If you haven't done so already, take a look at Survey 123. You can download Survey 123 and quickly create surveys in here. So I can click on a new survey. I can click in the community and take a look at everything that's available to me in here. And if you come down, I can actually find damage assessments, drug activity reporters. FEMA's got some surveys here as well, which we can use. And there's also down in here, we've got homeless count. So I can just select that, and I'll give this a test title and create a survey. And automatically it's going to download this survey and set me up with a basic template right here that I need to go out and do some surveying. It's also all driven from an Excel spreadsheet. So this is the schema inside the form. Easy to change, easy to work with, easy to publish. And if looking back in the survey, are they in a shelter? And it's going to ask an additional question, or no, they're not. Are we able to survey them? Yes or no? Are they cooperative? Then I've got sliders in here for different things. So take a look at these. These are all available within the Survey 123 community, and it's a really easy way to get started doing field data collections. From the field data collections, this data comes in real time, and now you've got metrics that you can actually apply by collecting your own demographic information. Another example of that is to do the opioid abuse problems, and we've got a dashboard for those, and there's a Survey 123 associated with that as well. So go to the solutions pages, take a look in there, get them downloads. I'd encourage you to download Survey 123. It's an easy tool, it's easy to deploy, easy to use, and works tremendously well. We've had a lot of success with it. Once you've got that data, you can now pull that into these dashboards. You can also pull that data directly into the web map that I showed you earlier. So now you can mash up your own data with some of the other data available from the Living Atlas. So maybe you want to target some of the homeless count areas. So this is really good stuff to put out there. Lastly, I just want to show again some of the amazing work they're doing here, but we can look at mass care. They've got ESF6 up here for mass care, and they've got shelters open, and this is all field data collections as well, which is tied in. And health and human services again, and this is all wrapped into the context of a story map. The beauty of doing this in a story map is it's one link, one URL, you've got a bookmark in your browser, but the content can change every day. So I think that's about the time I have to present you with at least getting started with demographic information today. I hope you've taken something out of this to go in and explore the Living Atlas, explore all the data that Esri has to you, and also the tremendous power here that you have in your hands of community analyst. The last thing that I didn't really mention was the reports. I showed you the infographics. But if you're more of a reports person, you can run reports out of here into a PDF or straight into Microsoft Excel as well. So all these reports are available for you. Just tremendous amounts of data. So please get out there, explore, and good luck.
Thank you so much, John. Excellent demonstration. And we are obviously just scratching the surface of what's available as far as local and state level, federal level data that you can integrate into your analysis to understand, what communities you're serving. And as we switch back, I wanted to discuss briefly or remind everybody briefly that we've got a couple of major Esri events coming up. And in July specifically, we've got our user conference. So if you want to come spend a few days with 20,000 of your closest GIS friends, please come out to San Diego, July 8th through 12th. And the beginning of that week is our National Security and Public Safety Summit, which if you're not familiar with that, please go online and take a look. That's the preceding weekend of the first weekend of the UC, July 6th through 9th. And it's very specifically focused at public safety. So you get, fire, EMS, law enforcement, Homeland Security, emergency management, DOD. So all of the content, all the educational sessions and all the presentations are specific to public safety. So it's an excellent event to attend. And then questions, John, you can assist me real quick. I've got a couple of questions, but they're all basically revolving around the use of credits. So, when you do a drive time analysis in AGOL, that may consume some credits. Can you talk about if there are credits required for community analysts or where that might apply?
Yes, absolutely, and that's a very good question. Yeah, a lot of the analysis products do actually consume some credits. Also, remember, a credit is approximately, I think, 10 cents for a credit. There is some credit usage in there. If you go into the tools will actually tell you how many credits before you do an analysis in most cases. But it is definitely usage on the drive time, usage on the geo-enrichment, and also community analyst, when it's producing the infographics, does actually do that because it's hitting the geo-enrichment services at the back end. And so you are using some credits there, yes.
Understood. Thank you so much. And we've got a few more questions that we'll be answering by email. So if we didn't get to them today, we will be following up along with the list of pertinent links. Certainly, if you have any issues that come up after we log off today, that's my email there on the screen. It's Mike_Cox at ESRI.com, Mike_Cox at Esri.com. And a video of this webinar will be posted soon in the next few days. So thank you so much for attending. We appreciate your attention, and please, if you have any questions, reach out and let us help support you in your use of GIS for public safety. Thank you and have a good day.